On this week's episode of The Capitalist Investor, the Federal Reserve dropped a bomb this week. They linked a study on how unauthorized immigration has created and is correlated to higher housing and rent prices. Today, we are going to push politics aside, read the research, and we're going to talk about how rising house prices and rents will affect and mold your retirement.
All right, Tony. How's it going, man? Welcome back.
What happened to our nicknames, man? Diamond Hands D, Tony the Tiger.
I have been doing them actually recently.
You have?
Yeah.
Why? Because you brought Dave out?
I think so, yeah.
What's him? What's his
He
name?
doesn't have a nickname. I just brought my nickname out.
You just brought Diamond Hands D and Dave?
Yeah.
All right.
Exactly.
All right, Diamond Hands D and Tony.
Yeah, we're going through some old episodes. We used to have sound effects
and everything, man. You know. I don't know. Maybe we'll throw a sound effect in there.
Maybe. You never know.
Cue the sound effect. All right. Anyway, so D, we're talking about. There was a post by the Federal Reserve talking about how there has been a 20 to 30% or 30% home growth and 20% rent growth throughout our nation.
Yep.
And they're linking it directly to immigration, the unauthorized immigration in the Biden era, that 2021 to 2024. And we want to push that headline aside and really look at what this study was, what it means, what are the facts, what are not the facts, because precursor, there isn't a ton of facts. So we're gonna talk about like all the underlying items that are attributing to this, because they are right. There is a huge spike in the prices of houses and also rents, to the point where wage growth really hasn't kept up with those increases, and it's very difficult for new home buyers and just people to rent.
Yep, for sure. Yeah, this headline caught my eye over the weekend because it is nice to put some facts and figures rather than just, shouting at each other. So while this is a politically charged topic, we want to look at what the research actually says and, what it means for pre-retirees and retirees. And, I think also for the economy at whole, this has been obviously a major issue for a long time now. So kind of understanding it, I think, just helps you understand the overall environment that we're in right now.
So, as we kind of did our homework and rolled up our sleeves and started doing some fact checks and things like that.
Yep.
It's very interesting. So this was a working paper is what they call it. So no one's really standing behind all the real numbers. Right. They're just saying, hey, this is the reports that we're seeing. So one of the headline numbers, according to the Washington Times, is that local labor force correspondence was about 2.5% rise in home prices and 1.4% in rents. I don't believe that whatsoever. Like, you're telling me that stuff's not going up higher than inflation? I mean,
well, I think so I think it said with every 1% increase in the unauthorized workforce, that correlated to a 2.2% rise in home prices and 1.4% increase in rent.
Okay.
So every 1% you add to the
working force.
Exactly.
All right.
It increased it by those numbers on average, and we'll talk about exactly what the study says in this section here, actually.
Right. And because the Economist came out and said, estimate, unauthorized immigration worker flows accounted for 30% of employment growth. Mm-hmm. That's interesting.
Yep, for sure.
And then roughly, are you allowed to hire an unauthorized person? That's where I'm just stuck.
Not really. No,
I don't think you're supposed to do that.
No.
So, but that growth, because I guess that does correlate with what you just mentioned, is that 30% home growth and 20% rent growth, between March of 21 and March of 24.
Yep.
So,
I think this fact was interesting as well. Basically, the surge in labor didn't really significantly impact the wages, which is interesting. So you would think, if there's a bunch of extra workers, that would drive the wage price down.
You would think.
Yep. And that doesn't seem to have happened as bad as the increase in the housing costs, essentially.
Right.
Because that is more of a static number that you have as far as, available homes, available rents. So the scarcity there drove up the costs much quicker than the wages went down.
Yeah. And I'm going to make an assumption that at least 80 to 90%, if we're having unauthorized workers working here, they're on in that minimum wage type of category, at least 80. I would make an assumption. I didn't look that number up, but I don't know if we can, how much we can latch to some of these numbers, but think about other impacts. So like they just mentioned unauthorized, immigration. Well, what about, we had other, I guess I would say, other reasons to these increases. So first, elevated mortgage rates. Well, that's making people not want to move, which is, messing with supply. And there's no supply, and yet people still need to move or buy a new home and things like that. Now, there was a lot of restrictive zoning laws and new construction, I guess, bandwidth. So some of the other factors that go into this isn't just immigration, right? It comes down to mortgage rates. We talked about how rising interest rates are causing people not to want to move. Who wants to give up a 3% mortgage for a 7%? Your mortgage payment's nearly going to double if that if that happens. Restrictive zoning laws and construction laws, and President Trump just lifted those not that long ago. So they're a little bit behind the curve, but he had to pass he had to undo some of the restrictive covenants against going out and building new homes. So making it easier for the construction companies to put a shovel in the ground.
Right, for sure.
And then institutional purchases, they were talking a lot about how like BlackRock and going out and buying these houses and not really concerned about what they're paying for them because they want the cash flow.
Right.
But that, they're now dictating the cost of a single family home rental, and that can also drive up the rates as well. And then material costs, obviously, just wood and steel and items like that. So there's a lot there.
Yep.
So it can't just be tied to one thing.
Yeah, which is one of my key takeaways, honestly. I think I think this going through this exercise kind of added in a lot of data points that are not discussed, obviously, when you see the headline, which is essentially, illegal immigration is causing a 30% spike in home prices. That's not necessarily the whole story here. So lots of factors going into it. And
then think about like location too.
Yeah, for sure.
Like there's a huge, cost of living adjustment between New York and Ohio, or even Miami, or so think about like where some of those prices are impacting the national average.
Yeah, for sure.
But here's the one thing. So if the number that they keep on saying is that there is 10 million, illegal, people that came across in that 3-year period.
Right. Mm-hmm.
I looked in it there are 3.5 million to 4 million new births in the United States. Okay. If 10 million came over in that 3-year span, that's roughly 3.5 million people per year. Mm-hmm. And then we tack on what our normal birth rate is. But the people coming over are looking for houses right now. The 3.5 million of new births, just think that's been happening for the last 25 years. And a 25 to 30-year-old person. So you do now have, rather than 3.5 million people, you have 7 million people looking for a new house.
Right.
So I can see in the construction costs and just the manual labor needed to build twice as many houses as normal in a snap of a finger. It happened instantaneously. So I could see that being the actual driving factor of there are a lot more people in the system looking for a house immediately, because you don't have a bunch of children coming over, right? It's adults maybe with children, but those adults need somewhere to live.
Yep, for sure.
Does that make sense?
Yeah, especially when it happens all at once. That just compounds the problem with everyone looking for the housing all at one time, and causing a significant demand crisis.
Right.
Which is kind of highlights some of the problems that we've been seeing for a while. And I think this paper alludes to it as well. The supply problem of housing is the root cause of most of these issues, and I think most economists agree on that. That's kind of the one of the main issues is the supply problem.
Yeah. So, all right. So let's talk about how this might be affecting a retiree.
Yep.
Right. So you're either renting, you're owning, or you're moving sideways. Maybe you're downsizing. Right. There's, I guess, 3 different scenarios that we can think of. Well, if you own your house, your equity is going up.
Right.
When we build a financial plan, we never have you liquidating your house. So that does not, all it does is increase your net worth, but it doesn't really help your retirement unless you leverage it for line of credit or reverse mortgage or something along them lines, right? So if you own, it's not really affecting you,
right?
Unless you're going to move, right? And you're going to downsize. And this is where I think that's a moot point. So you sell your current house high, you buy your next house high.
Oh yeah.
Right? And let's say that there's a correction and housing costs, or the cost of a house does come down, right? Like it comes off the peak and it doesn't just keep on skyrocketing. And people are like, oh my God, I bought my new house and I lost so much money. Well, you would have lost your money in the house that you just sold.
Exactly.
So I look at that as a moot point too. Unless you downsize, but it cost you more than your current house. Like you had to go mortgage $100 to $200,000, which is
what's happening right now.
It's possible,
yeah.
right? And most people, even they are downsizing, they're still having a hard time.
Oh yeah.
Getting into a house from the equity that they sold their current house at. So then we have rents. Well, that's a big headwind. If you're renting and you're heading into retirement or retired, right? That's a big headwind and an unknown primarily. So
yeah, that's when we're building out a plan for our clients and we're putting in an inflation factor in there. People are retiring earlier, living longer, so we have a longer period of retirement we have to plan for. So yeah, if one of your main expenses is rent, and it's going up faster than the rate of inflation that we have in the plan, which is usually around 3%, that's going to put pressure on your budget. There's no doubt about it.
Yeah, I mean, in our plans, we used to increase the inflation rate on healthcare. We may need to do that on
for sure.
If we're building a plan for a renter, we might need to spike that to 5% rather than 3%.
Yep, for sure.
Now, so I talked about I called it a moot point between an owner, owning a house. What do you do with it if you're not planning on moving, or if you are planning on moving? Like it's a moot point in my opinion. I mean, it could be, unless you upgrade, and stuff like that. But what about the renter? So that's the person that we really have to be diligent on. So some of the solutions for that person is obviously planning for it. That's the key number one. But also trying to find investments that are going to help pay for that increase.
Right.
So what do you do? Do you make it? It could make a case for annuities that have inflation hedges. Your Social Security, do you delay that because you're going to get more income? And plus they've increased with inflation, right? So these are some of the things that are more predictable, and that are real hedges against increase in rents that you can't control, right? You might have to put it in your own hands to figure out what to do with that. And there's a couple different investment options and choices, and when to turn certain spigots on in your retirement.
Yep.
So,
and this is one of my main, I guess, arguments for things I believe in. Renters have no inflation hedge usually, right? So like you said, if you move during this period, it's kind of a moot point, or a moo point, a cow's opinion, just doesn't matter. That's an old school reference there.
I like that.
But that's exactly the problem. And that's what is causing people to get behind. And that is the thing that I want people not to have to go through. If you own a house during this environment, you're just in a way better position than the people that have to rent.
Correct.
And the people who have to rent are putting more and more and more of their percentage of their income towards that rent. You see, stories of, people getting their rent increased by big numbers, doing it at the last minute. You see all kinds of bad practices out there. That's what anything that goes against kind of the American dream is something I am against. And, just having to, fork over more and more money for the same rent, that hurts people in that segment. And what it does is it kind of drives a wedge further between the haves and the have-nots, and that's one of my main points of everything I believe in is I don't want that. I want everyone to have that ability to access the American dream like that. And
the American dream was to own a home.
Yep, exactly.
Right? So the only other thing we can think of, so whether you're a renter or an owner, you're like, okay, we understand that housing has a better case to continue to go up than to go down. Yep. So how do I invest in that though? Rather, it could be REITs, right? A real estate investment trust. Now, that if you believe that rents and houses are going to continue to creep forward and continue to rise, and I can talk to 1,000 people that have rented in real estate, and they say that's their best investment ever, right? Like but have we pulled a lot of returns forward, in the last several years? Yeah, that's something to think about. So if you want to invest in a REIT, that would make the sense if you believe it's going to go up. I could look at it and say it could be a very risky proposition for a REIT, just because you could be buying high.
Yep, for sure.
They if interest rates come down and construction catches up and regulations are stripped away so they can build houses faster, that is where we're going to have this supply and demand shift, and prices could actually come down.
Yep, for sure.
And then if you buy a REIT and they're not getting the income that they projected, then that REIT goes down. So it's definitely a solution, but you have to be careful and size it appropriately, and also believe that don't just do it because someone said it was a good idea. What do you think is going to happen? So that you can feel confident in investing in something like that.
Yep. But
as we wrap this up, Derek, I believe that this Fed study, I think it's real, but there's way more layers to it than just immigration. Right. It's part of the puzzle. It's a politically charged headline because there's just too many factors that go into it.
Yep, for sure. And another kind of takeaway, like we just talked about, the disparity between renters and owners of homes, is exasperated, during these periods of inflation.
Yep. So I guess the call to action for this is, take a look at your housing cost as a percentage of your projected retirement income, and if you're above 30%, whether you're renting or carrying a mortgage, that number needs attention, and we have to start gearing around it, looking at it, and seeing how can we get that number down, because it does have a better probability of going up than going down.
Yeah, for sure.
So,
and make sure you're planning for inflation in your financial plan, especially in the next 5-year period. I don't think it's going to cool down that quickly.
Right. And, again, looking, finding somebody that's going to help, financial advisor that's going to really help find an income plan around this
for sure.
is a big deal, because I'm like, okay, my house is paid off, but what if you want to move? Like in your mortgage is, we painted that scenario where your mortgage is going to be higher. You might have to bring on an additional mortgage because even though you're downsizing, the house might be nicer, more amenities, different location, right? If you're here in Ohio with us, like moving anywhere is going to be more expensive.
Yeah, for sure.
So again, the income planning part through retirement, whether it's housing or anything else, right? And just retirement goals in general is such an important part.
Yep, no doubt. All right. Well, that was a good conversation. It's nice to talk about some of the things currently going on. So we'll continue to watch that situation. But thanks everyone out there for listening. If you have any questions, ideas for a show, anything like that, hit us up at info@swpconnect.com, and we'll talk to you next week.
The opinions expressed in the podcast are for general informational purposes only and are not intended to provide specific advice or recommendations for any investment, legal, financial, or tax strategy. It is only intended to provide education about the financial industry. Please consult a qualified professional about your individual needs.